Korea is becoming a greater market for global companies, and Korean companies are becoming greater players in the global market. That being said, both groups need as much help as they can get to navigate the intricacies of their business environment. Our globalist today is Per Stenius, CEO of Reddal, a global consulting firm focusing on business development, who does just that. Even though Reddal started out in Finland in 2010, it soon opened its first overseas branch in Seoul and has been active in Korea ever since. So welcome, Mr. Stenius, Per, to our program.
Thank you very much. I look forward to this.
So you work in both Helsinki, Seoul, around the world, but this time in Seoul, what's your activities like in Korea?
Well, first of all, I live in Seoul, so my wife is Korean, and I spend most of my time here. In Korea, we both work with international companies, but also with Korean companies. So one of the reasons we founded an office here was that we see great potential in the Korean companies and hope that we can help them expand abroad. At the same time, there is interest from international companies to enter the market, and we try to help them with that as well.
Unless you saw the business opportunities in Seoul, you would not have opened an office here. But could you elaborate a little bit more on the potential that you saw here that got you to open this market?
Maybe I was a little bit starstruck. In 2010, we were working with a large Korean company in Finland and helping them with various activities in Europe. And then the second year, 2011, we started thinking about having some kind of event for the staff. And instead of having a party, we decided to travel, the whole company. At the time, we were quite small still, so the whole company traveled to Korea. And the reason was simple, that Korea, had been the fastest growing nation since the Korean War. And so it had a reputation that we were sort of interested to see more about. One of the things that you see when you come to Korea is that it's still a little bit insular. It's sort of its own world. And we see, and because we had worked with a Korean company already by that time, we could see that there could be a benefit of having somebody who can bridge the gap between Korea and the rest of the world in certain places. So that's what we wanted to do.
Korea, because as you pointed out, it developed so fast. For a long time, they didn't even consider Korea as a market.
Right.
But now Korea has really fast-tracked into this market. Do you think overseas companies are realizing the potential of the Korean market?
In 2010, 2011, when we came here, I think Korea did not yet, it wasn't that famous or that known. But since then, a lot of things have happened. We have the K-pop wave and all of these Korean movies, all of these things. So I think a lot of people now know. In Helsinki, the proliferation of Korean restaurants has been tremendous in the last 5 years. So I think we are seeing that the Korean culture and the Korean market is becoming more and more sort of familiar to the foreigners.
But there's still a lot more to be done.
Oh, absolutely. You know, a lot of people have a very narrow view on what Korea is because they see so little about it. And I still think that most of Europeans haven't been to, I mean, many people go to Japan and they have a certain view of Japan. They've done that for 10 years maybe, but Korea is still new for them. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that a lot of people already know Japan. A lot of people think they know China. But, you know, I think Korea sort of suffers from this lack of real knowledge. They think Korea is something in between China and Japan.
Right.
Do you find that? Is that something that you need to resolve or maybe something that helps you in some ways?
I mean, first of all, for Europeans, understanding that Korean, Japanese, and Chinese are different languages and they're not related, that's a little bit unfamiliar.
That itself, you have to
Yeah, because Europe is, you know, the languages are related to each other. But then the second thing is that the Korean culture, despite of the Korean dramas and all of that, which we can nowadays see, it's still a little bit of mystery how Korea works and what are things that are going on here. So I think people don't really have a clear picture on what Korea is compared to Japan or China maybe. One thing I wish that there were more Korean novels translated into English, because my knowledge comes a lot from that as well. That when you start reading Korean novels, you know, and many of them talk about the Gwangju Revolution or other things that happened, right? Historical things. Or they reflect those, you get a much deeper picture of Korea. So I usually recommend them to read some Korean authors that have been translated into English and start there.
To sort of understand the Korean psyche, maybe history.
Yes.
But then how do foreign companies take advantage of this kind of knowledge about Korea?
Well, first of all, if I look at the US or European countries, they all have chambers of commerce here in Korea. Myself, I'm a member of the Finnish Chamber of Commerce, also the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, but I'm also the vice chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce. So most of the foreign companies, when they come here, they have a touch point with the Chamber of Commerce or some other place that helps them getting going.
So do these Chamber of Commerces do the role of really giving them a smooth entrance into the market?
Well, I think they give them an entry point and they give some insights. But then, of course, when you enter the market, there are a lot of new things that come about and you have to sort of, you know, get used to that. Most foreign companies choose to have a Korean country manager because the local regulation, all of those things are so special here. And there's a lot of sort of, formalities, bureaucracy that you have to fill in. And typically in Korea, you have to do that in Korean language. So there is a need for sort of a local management as well.
And what role does Reddal play?
Well, our role is really, first of all, to analyze the market and think about, sometimes we are also looking at acquisition targets. So the foreign company might be looking at some investment opportunity in Korea. So we also help them with that kind of due diligence and such. But I have to say that because Korea is not an easy market, and so I always say to our clients in Europe and US, when they think about this market, I say, well, first of all, you have to be serious about the market. You have to be committed for 10 years or longer, because in Korea, nothing comes fast. For sure, the brands, Mercedes, BMW, all the cosmetics brands from Europe, they had a big business here. But even in those cases where there is a demand already, you have to build the business. And in Korea, it just takes time to do that, to get used to how Korea works and all of those things. So you can't enter a market like you would enter a market in Europe.
But at the same time, you know, Korea is known for the country of 빨리빨리. You know, everything gets done really quickly here.
Well, I think that's a little bit of a sort of a mystery here, that things are done very quickly on the day-to-day, but then to actually build some deeper relationships or all those things, they take a very long time. So there's this sort of a bifurcation where you have this 빨리빨리 and then you have this long-term stuff, and there's nothing in between, so to speak.
Well, that could make people very frustrated about the fact that you are not moving so quickly from one side to the other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I came to Korea, we very quickly built a network here. I was invited to various places. I even spoke to the National Assembly. National Assembly Budget Office invited me for a seminar. I've spoken to some of the National Assembly special committees. I've never spoken to those in Europe or in Finland, but here I have. So it is very easy in Korea to get to know people and, you know, to start talking to people. But that's still very different from building a long-term relationship and all of those things. So I think that many foreigners are surprised that initially it seems like a very easy market to enter, but then they're surprised that the business doesn't pick up as quickly as it could, right? So at least for us, that was the case, that after the honeymoon was over, we sort of recognized that, hey, this will take a long time and we need to build the team here and all of those things.
How do you do that? I mean, give us your example of building a team. There are all these different things you have to take into consideration. You can't do it too fast. You're talking about language, local presence. What is the guiding principle of building a presence in Korea?
Recruiting here is quite easy for us. I mean, we go to Yonsei, we go to Seoul National, we go to Korea. I mean, the recruiting market is very well defined here. You have the certain universities where you look for certain talent and so on. So for us, that was very easy. And we were always happy with the amount of talent we could find here. But we wanted to take that talent and maybe a little bit detach it from the Korean culture, because in Korean culture you have this hierarchy of age and position, whereas in the Nordic culture we don't have that at all. So we felt it was very important to take the Koreans out and have them trained in Europe, where all of our global staff is trained anyways, so that they could experience what the Nordic culture is. Because we wanted to build an office that combines the Nordic and the Korean culture. There's a lot of good things about the Korean culture, but there's also a lot of good things about the Nordic culture. And when you combine these two, I think you get a really good mix.
What is the number one difficulty for Finnish companies or even other global companies as they try to navigate this process?
Well, so it was quite interesting. Our Korean client in Finland, when we started working in 2010, it was actually a merger between a Korean and a Finnish company. And in the end, I have to say that that merger failed. That was several years down the road, 5-6 years down the road. But at the time, I didn't, of course, know so much about Korea. I learned along the way. But it was very interesting that the Finnish management always felt like the Korean management was very hierarchical, very militaristic, very strict. And the Koreans, now that once I built the relationship and I started understanding what they were saying and all of that, they felt the same way about the Finns.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, if you knew both sides and if you were able to speak to both sides, you recognized that they were exactly the same, but they had the same misconception of each other. And that's a big thing that we try to sort of bridge when we talk to Korean companies who are going to Europe or US, or when we are talking to European companies when they come to Korea. We try to bridge that cultural sort of barrier, which is really on the surface, because once you go beyond that, you will find a lot of commonality.
So the commonalities, in order to get to the commonalities, you have to overcome what you think are the differences. Do you find that there's a difference in Korea compared to your other markets in terms of foreign companies trying to work here?
I used to be also involved in startups and venture capital and so on. But a Finnish startup company, when it goes abroad, first of all, it never had a home market. So every Finnish startup company, from the start, they think about the global market as their market. And for us, inside the EU, it's very easy to navigate. Regulations are very similar. Okay, languages are different, but the culture is very similar. Also, labor regulation, those kind of things are very similar. And also going to the US, it's fairly easy for a European company to do that. The ways of doing it is already standardized and all of that. Going to Korea is a little bit more difficult. There's a language barrier. There's a regulative and legal environment, which is different. But at the same time, Finland and Korea are surprisingly similar. First of all, our industrial background is the same. I mean, Finland grew after the Second World War. We lost the war to Russia. We had to sort of survive that period. And so we built a certain industry structure. Korea built a similar industry structure here. Second of all, in Finland, we have a drinking culture. We also have that here in Korea. And we have the sauna culture.
Yeah.
The sauna culture is very similar as well. And what I have seen is that when Koreans come to Finland, they feel very much at home. Because it is like Korea, but it's much more spacious, right?
Yeah.
And they can enjoy sort of nature and all those things. So there is a very good connection.
So you talk about your Korean client base. In the Korean business environment, there are the big companies and there are the small companies, and each have their own function. What is your proportion of business clients between the big and the SMEs, the small and medium industries?
I would say it's pretty much 50-50. I mean, we want to work with the SMEs because one of the things we have been trying to advocate here in Korea, whenever we speak to regulative agencies and others, is the importance of the SME sector. Obviously, the big corporations are important and we're happy to work with them. But the SMEs is something like a little bit of a pet project for us. We'd like to see more SMEs being international. And the reason is very simple. Korean economy depends on having a balanced structure between big, medium, and small. Government has emphasized startups a lot in the recent years, but I think that will take some time. I mean, obviously because they're startups. We have a lot of SMEs here in Korea which have been working with the large chaebols, the large corporations for a long time, which means their products, their quality processes, all of those things are already in order, but they're not international. And if you compare to Germany or Finland for that matter, in Germany we have something called the Mittelstand. People think of Germany as BMW, Mercedes, all the big brands, right? But in fact, the German economy is driven by a lot of these SMEs who nobody has ever heard of them, but they are global market leaders in their own little area. Often they are family owned, often they have a history of 100 years or more even, but they play a big role in the German economics. And in Korea, we don't have that. And I think that causes a couple of things. First of all, we're not leveraging the full potential of our industrial infrastructure. But second of all, it creates this bifurcation of high-paying jobs and low-paying jobs. The corporations tend to get the high-paying jobs. And because the SMEs are serving the corporations and thereby limiting their sort of growth potential maybe because they're domestic, the jobs are not as well-paying. So I think for Korea to address this inequality and all that, we need SMEs to offer high-paying jobs as well. And that means the SMEs have to be globally successful. They have to find new markets outside of the domestic market.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the need to go global, but Korean government has been talking about getting SMEs to be more active for as long as I can remember the Korean government talking. But they have not been as successful as they would have liked. Besides the limits on their global activities, what do you see as some of the things that need to be changed in order for SMEs to be more active?
I appreciate the government's efforts, but already when I spoke to the National Assembly Budget Office conference on the matter, that was almost 10 years ago, I showed them a book called Boulevard of Broken Dreams. It's a Harvard Business School professor who had looked at various countries, various governments trying to improve, including Finland, by the way, how the governments try to improve the business, the ways the business operate globally. And unfortunately, the message is that most governments fail. So it is not very easy.
So it's not just the Korean government?
No, absolutely not. And of course, these government actions are needed. They are important. But by themselves, they will not change it requires a change from within. Personally, I think that the new generation of Korean entrepreneurs and businessmen, many of the SMEs are family-owned companies. And they are now in their second generation. So the founding person maybe is now old, retiring, and the second generation is stepping up, or even the third generation. And I have a big faith in these because they usually have a broader perspective on what's going to happen and what they could do. And I think they're maybe a little bit more courageous also. They want to try some new things.
And a lot of them are much more globally educated.
That's correct. That's absolutely
correct. And experienced
That's
as
correct.
well.
Yes. So the language skill does play a role for sure. I mean, having that cultural background.
Well, we've had a lot of startups and SMEs on our program that have been very exciting, in terms of what their expertise are and what their areas are. But we don't think they're as well known as they should be. Is that something that Reddal can help them with?
Sure, but we have to remember that in most of the industries, if you're doing B2B or if you're doing a technological product, getting known is actually not the big thing. Media likes to have these unicorn stories and all of those, but in reality, to build a presence in a new market, that maybe is not what you need to have, because this fame, it's not what drives business in general for B2B businesses. They need to find the right partners, they need to find the right customers, they need to find their position in that. And often also, for example, in the automotive sector, we have many Korean companies, SME companies. When they enter Europe, the problem is that they need to establish an office or some kind of operation in Europe very quickly because the clients there want to have local presence. And so that could be a hurdle for them, that they are afraid of the investment and all of that.
Well, you talk about the automobile industry, which is obviously one because we have the big automobile companies and obviously maybe the SMEs that sort of accompany the industry. What are some of the other industries that you see have the potential of really becoming a lot more global than they are now?
Actually, it goes quite broadly. So we talk about standard industries like marine or automotive or such, but then you have the electronics industry, you have the software side of things, and you also have fast-moving consumer goods. Korean food, Korean cosmetics, all of those are actually growing quite rapidly. And I think for those companies, it's a little bit easier because in that case, media attention and all that serves in their interest. The company doesn't have to be famous, but because there is a Korean wave, especially cosmetics and food right now in Europe, it sort of pulls them into that, and a lot of people are interested in that. In Finland, for example, you can find tens of different ramen sorts. You can find soju. You can find all of that.
And we've had some of those on our show as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for them, the fame and the trends play a bigger role. Whereas in B2B, when you talk about hard technology or things like that, there you have to really build the presence and sort of find the right customers. So it's a little bit different there.
Well, when you talk about Finland and about these commonalities between Finnish companies and how they do their business and Korean companies, could you elaborate? What are some of the similarities, some of the differences?
So funnily enough, a lot of Korean companies have come to Finland first, using that as a pilot market, and then they expand to Europe from there.
Oh, they find Finland a good,
I guess they do. Maybe
a familiar market, maybe?
Maybe, and also I think that because there's really good connections, travel connections are quite easy. I mean, even tourists, they fly through Helsinki and then they fly to other destinations. So there has been that, and maybe there has been a little bit of benefit from all this moving and other characters that we have in Finland. So Koreans have been interested in those kind of things, and there's a little bit of that. I think language still is the big issue for Koreans, and having, especially because when you expand abroad, you usually need the senior people to be involved. And some companies still have, difficulties finding senior people who have international capabilities or languages and other things. So that's sort of one thing. Also, for many of the Korean SMEs, it just feels safer to work with the chaebols here. It's a steady, revenue stream. There's no risk. And you got to remember that because of the Korean economy developed so rapidly, many of these they're family-owned SMEs, but a lot of them have made their fortunes now in real estate. So the original business maybe is not in the forefront of their interest anymore. It's a side business, they still keep it, but they actually have investments in other areas now. So that's sort of one thing that maybe detracts them a little bit from pushing the company global.
But you think that is critical in terms of their future?
I think it is very important, not only for the companies, but for Korea as a whole. In Reddal, Korea is future lab. This country is aging faster than any other country on the planet. We are soon going to be passing Japan in aging. Yeah. We have huge inequality, other challenges. I tell all of the people I work with in Europe that watch what Korea does, because in the past, Korea was catching up. But in fact, Korea has been developing so fast that it's hitting all the problems that we will see in Europe in 10 years' time.
Yeah. That's where the pali comes in.
Well, for sure. And I think the Korean government has a huge challenge in addressing these, because in their situation, it's very hard to look at the other countries in Europe, because we are actually facing problems here that the other countries will face in 5 to 10 years' time, because everything is changing so rapidly here.
Well, one of those issues, as you pointed out in terms of lower birth rate, is, I guess, the gender equality, the acceptance of differences into the corporate culture. Finland is known to be a very gender-friendly country and has a corporate culture like that. Do you see aspects of that can be incorporated into Korean companies? Do they ask about that?
It strikes me as odd that we have these issues in Korea, because if you think about China and Japan, their language and everything was done so that it creates inequality. But in Korea, the Korean language, especially the written language, was created so that everybody could learn to read and write.
Yeah.
And so you had that sort of thinking already very long time ago in your history. But somehow there's always been this inequality still built in. So I think that Emperor Sejong, when he created this language, he was thinking the right way, but somehow that transition into really leveraging all of our people in Korea in an effective way, that we didn't sort of get far enough with that, and we still have to solve that issue.
And, seeing the Finnish experience and in that process could speed up the process.
Well, for any country which has a limited population compared to its neighbors, and of course Finland is much smaller than Korea, but still, even compared to our neighbors, we have an uphill battle. Korea has the same. So for those kind of nations, it's very important that you can effectively utilize all the people that you have in your country so that you get the most out of it, because you're fighting bigger opponents on both sides.
Well, that's another commonality that Korea and Finland have, and that might draw us closer. No?
Well, I mean, Korea has China and Japan. We have always had Russia and Sweden. I mean, Sweden was a great power in the old days.
True, yeah. So we shall see. And hopefully there's going to be even more closer cooperation in the future. And Reddal will be a very active player in all of that.
We hope so.
Yep.
Hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's it for me. I'll be back next week with another globalist who's putting Korea on the map. Sunji out.